The wait is over. The anxiety is lifted. Colin Simmons is a Texas Longhorn.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On today to get started. And on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, Colin Simmons committed to the 40. We attacked that from all angles. And then who's next? Who will be following Colin Simmons to the University of Texas? And last but not least, I'll give my thoughts on the new Big 12. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're watching on YouTube and you enjoy the show, please like, please subscribe. I'm thankful for all your support, whether it's on audio or video. And Longhorn Nation and whoever is listening, another long week for me. Don't want to put that on y'all, but I assume, some people listening had a long week as well. So we've made it to Friday. Right? We got to get through today. But now that we've made it to Friday, the weekend is here. I hope everybody has a safe and fun weekend. Try to stay out of the heat as much as you can. And, I guess we'll get back to it on Monday, right? Colin Simmons, the big news, one of the biggest recruiting battles the University of Texas has been involved in over the last decade has now over, right? I can officially say it's over. If he would have committed to LSU or Miami, I would be on here wolfing saying, it's going down to the wire and don't count us out until December and he's still going to sign with us. He's going to flip, right? Now that he's committed to Texas, it's over. Stop the count, right? LSU and Miami, y'all are done. Go focus on somebody else, right? One of the biggest recruiting battles in the last decade, and Texas won it. We have come so far since 2021. Shout out to Steve Sarkisian and what his staff has been able to do. Shout out to Jeff Banks, who I don't think anybody knew was Colin Simmons' primary recruiter until yesterday. So, the way for him to, step up and get one of the best players in Texas, over the last decade, just a dominant edge at Duncanville. He talked about how Texas was home, being able to stay in his own backyard and play in the SEC and dominate, I think was huge. We've already seen the SEC move, pay dividends in terms of recruits. And I'm glad when he meant stay close to home, he didn't mean SMU. Because if you're watching the ceremony, somehow a SMU cap popped up. And we know he took an official visit there, right? So I'm like, is he going to shock the world and go to SMU? But thankfully, he came a little bit down the road to the University of Texas. And he talked about how he didn't make his decision until Wednesday night, right? And that's why, this recruitment was so anxiety-filled for everybody because, unlike every other recruitment in the world, we didn't know where Colin Simmons was going until he put the hat on. And it was refreshing to see a recruitment that really came down to the wire, and we didn't know where he was going a month before because of crystal balls, So he said he didn't make his decision until Wednesday night, and it came down to the head coach. And thankfully, we got Steve Sarkisian, and LSU has Brian Kelly, because I'm telling you, if LSU still had Ed Orgeron, Colin Simmons would have been a Tiger back in June, right? So thankfully, we got Steve Sarkisian, who's a little bit better at recruiting than Brian Kelly. And obviously you have to believe in what Texas is going to do over the next 3 to 4 years to commit to the University of Texas. And it looks like Colin Simmons and his family believe in what we're going to do at the 40 acres. So just a huge recruiting win. And, we'll talk about in the next segment who will come next after Colin Simmons, because I have a feeling, just like Arch last year, when you pulled in your headliner, your crown jewel of the class, that there's a lot of big name players that want to line up next to Colin Simmons at the 40 acres, Arch Manning, et cetera, et cetera. Hopefully every year in our recruiting classes, we bring in players like Arch Manning and Colin Simmons, because those are the type of players you need to win at the highest level. Why is this such a big deal? I got my outline in front of me and I came up with 3 points. The first point I came up with is that this is a huge position of need, right? You're talking about the 8th overall player in the 24/7 Sports Composite. We've talked a million times about how it's been so long since Texas got a player that high in the state of Texas, since Texas got a player that high on the defensive side of the ball, since Texas brought in a player that high, period, right? It's been a long time. But this is a huge position of need. I've said on the podcast numerous times, the 3 most important position in sports, right? The quarterback, the person that throws the ball, the left tackle or right tackle, right? The person that protects the quarterback's blind side, right? And then you're talking about the edge rusher, right? The person that is sacking the quarterback. Those are the 3 most important positions in football. So not only is Colin Simmons one of the best players in this recruiting class, but he is a player at a premium position. When you look at what we have at the 40 acres right now, I think we have solid players, but I don't think we have anybody that just truly truly moves the needle, right? I don't think we have anybody that offensive coordinators are losing sleep over. I don't think we have anybody that offensive coordinators are going into a game and saying, I cannot let him beat me, right? I think Barron Sorrell is a very good player. I think Colin Simmons and his potential, you're talking about a completely different level, right? I think Barron Sorrell is a very respectable player, and I think he could end up with 7.5, 8 sacks this year. But like I said, I just don't think offensive coordinators are going into games saying, I can't let Barron Sorrell beat me, right? Colin Simmons is that type of player. When you look at everywhere else, right, the depth, right? They're talking about depth concerns behind Barron Sorrell, maybe putting Justice Finkley there. On the other side, they're talking about a combination of maybe Ethan Bird, Jamon Tapp, Tassili Akana, and Colton Vasek while using Anthony Hill off the bench, as a situational third down pass rusher. Basically, we have a lot of guys, but we don't have the guy, right, at this position. And like I said, it's one of the 3 most important positions in the sport. We talked about on an episode I either did yesterday or sometime this week where Eric Naline gave his takes on each position group on this football team. And he said, right now, the edge position, the pass rush might be the biggest concern going into the season, right? And less than a month away from the Rice game, you don't even know who's starting opposite Barron Sorrell. So not only is this just a huge need for every football team, this is a dire need for Texas going into the SEC. And I think Colin Simmons comes in and starts from day one, because if you're having depth issues right now, right, and Barron Sorrell won't be here next year, what will it look like next season? At least you'll have Colin Simmons to man one of those spots, and I think he'll be one of the best players in the country from day one. A huge win in that regard at a huge position of need. The second reason this is such a huge win for Texas is it keeps the best players in the state of Texas. I talked about yesterday that you cannot win at the level that Texas wants to win if you allow players in your backyard, like Colin Simmons says, to either go to other schools in Texas, namely Texas A&M or just Texas Tech, any other school, right? Or go to these other schools in the SEC that now you'll have to compete against, right? We've seen for years players like Myles Garrett, Garrett Wilson, J.K. Dobbins. All right, I can't name all of them off the top of my head, but for years we have seen players leave the state of Texas and go out of the state to dominate, right? And that is part of the reason why Texas is coming off one of its worst stretches of football in its history, because they were not able to lock down Texas. Texas, Florida, and California are the 3 biggest recruiting hotbeds in the country. Texas cannot compete for conference and national championships if they cannot lock down the state of Texas. So they've been able to do that a little bit better since Steve Sarkisian and his staff have taken over. We saw last year, you brought in Malik Muhammad, Jonte Cook, 2 of the best players in the state of Texas, Anthony Hill, the 17th overall player in the country, one of the best players in the state of Texas. And now you have a chance to bring in players like Colin Simmons and Kobe Black, 2 of the best players in the state this year. So if Texas wants to compete at a high level in the SEC, if Texas wants to be in the national championship conversation starting next year and every year after that, then you have to get the best players out of the state of Texas to come to the University of Texas and play with that Texas across their chest. And it's something we've done a little bit better the last 2 years since Steve Sarkisian took over. And it looks like with the addition of Colin Simmons, it's something that will be a trend moving forward. And the last reason I think, this is a huge recruiting win and it'll pay dividends now and after is it gives you credibility at that position. For so long, players in Texas or just outside of the state of Texas would not choose Texas because there was not a huge track record of Texas producing NFL caliber players at that position, right? When you look at, defensive players going to Alabama, they have 16 years of data that tells them if they go to Alabama, they're going to end up probably in the NFL, right? You look at Georgia for the last 5, 6, 7 years, whatever, they have a track record, right? They can see that for the last 6, 7 years, if you go to Georgia as a defensive player, you're going to end up in the NFL, right? Receivers at Ohio State. That's now the place to go. If you are a top receiver, you want to go to Ohio State because you're going to get the best development and you're going to end up in the NFL. Offensive linemen at Michigan, running backs at Texas, the list goes on and on. But we don't have a great track record of bringing in really good linebackers or really good defensive line players at the University of Texas and them turning into solid players in the NFL, right? Colin Simmons could be the player that breaks that mold because Colin Simmons coming to the University of Texas is going to want to make other high-profile players come to the University of Texas. If Texas starts to win and Colin Simmons dominates while doing it, and he ends up as an early round draft pick in the NFL, which a lot of people think he will, and he certainly has the talent and potential to do so, now players can look at that as an example, and they can say, oh, well, the University of Texas is winning. Oh, I'm an edge rusher, and I just saw them put Colin Simmons in the league, right? They are dominating in the SEC, and they have players that look like me, that play my position, who are going on to do big things at the next level and making a lot of money, which is my ultimate goal. So Colin Simmons was kind of the first player in a long time at the University of Texas that is a dominant player at a huge position of need like this. And I hope moving forward, this will lead to us bringing in more edge players, just like if Anthony Hill dominates at the University of Texas, you'll start to see more linebackers want to come and play at the 40 acres. So this pays dividends right now while Colin Simmons is here at the University of Texas, and I think he'll be a day one starter next year. But you're talking about 5 to 10 years down the road, this could be the first domino in the line of a lot of dominant defensive players coming to the University of Texas because you were able to get this recruiting win over LSU and Miami. Credit to the staff, credit to everybody who was involved in this. This is huge. It might not be bigger than Arch Manning, but it might be the second biggest recruiting win of the last decade. Colin Simmons is that special, and it looks like next year he'll be playing with Texas across his chest. A quick word from our sponsors, and then we're talking about who could join Colin Simmons on the 40 acres. For a championship team, it's all about making sure that every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits just right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. So get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. So we know that Steve Sarkisian can recruit, and we didn't get to see the full effect of it at USC. Obviously, it was cut short, and we know why it was cut short. We don't need to discuss it on the podcast, but we saw a team at USC win back-to-back 10-win seasons. And a lot of people that know college football and are in the know give Steve Sarkisian credit for that, because before he was dismissed at USC, he had the second-ranked recruiting class, right? And that class ended up winning, like I said, back-to-back double-digit win seasons at USC, right? So Steve Sarkisian has shown in the past that he can recruit, even at Washington, even though he wasn't bringing in top 10, top 15 recruiting classes, which would be hard to do at Washington, period. He took a team that was 0-12 to a 6-7 win team the next year, right? That comes with recruiting, bringing in really good players. And there are a lot of players that played in the NFL that were at Washington when Steve Sarkisian was at Washington. So we have seen a track record of recruiting before he came to the University of Texas, but now he's just taking his recruiting chops to a whole nother level. You know, 2021, he didn't have a lot of control over, but he brought in Xavier Worthy, who's been one of the best receivers in the country since he stepped on a college campus. We know 2022 was a huge year, you know, for Texas football, bringing in 15 total players in the trenches, a top 5 class. And that 2023 class last year, I've said it, is one of the most talented classes I have ever seen, regardless of the school, you know, and regardless of the year, right? Just since I've been following recruiting, since I've been looking at recruiting classes, that 2023 class from top to bottom just looks special, right? And I think they're going to do a lot of special things on the 40 acres and in the SEC. But this 2024 class is still being written, right? It's still not set in stone. And now you got your headliner, your big dominant piece in Colin Simmons, but we know that they're going to bring in some more 5 stars. They're looking to bring in some more really talented players at the top of the class to play with Colin Simmons, play in the SEC, and hopefully take Texas back into the conference championship and national championship conversation. So let's go over 6 players that Texas could really use and is still in the running for. 6 players that are all ranked in the top 115 in the 24/7 Sports Composite. We're going to start with Kobe Black, and Kobe Black has felt like locked to Texas for a while. And I think Colin Simmons committing to Texas yesterday confirmed that. Even before Colin Simmons had made his decision, Kobe Black talked about canceling his visits to LSU and I think it was Alabama. So, like I said, he's felt like a Texas lock for a long time. Out of Waco, his teammate, Jelani McDonald, committed to Texas last year, and he's a true freshman. So they have a really good relationship. We know that he had an official visit to Texas A&M either this past weekend or the weekend before, but he snuck up to Texas for an unofficial right before he went to Texas A&M. So that should tell you everything you need to know. Kobe Black, a 5-star corner, somebody who's going to be really good at the 40 acres if he chooses to commit, and I think he will. He just released his top 5. Texas was in the middle. They talk about recruiting flyer science or logo science. I think Kobe Black ends up at the University of Texas. Like I said, he's been leaning that way a while, but I think with Colin Simmons confirming he's coming to UT yesterday, I think Kobe Black is on his way as well, a 5-star corner who Terry Joseph would love to have. And like I said, he's going to play really well at Texas. Dominique McKinley, I think this is a big one because we haven't seen, since this staff took over, Bo Davis bring in a big fish yet, right? He had, some really talented players at Keandre Coburn and, Mora Ojimo and those guys to work with. And then, of course, Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy. And he brought in Sadir Mitchell, last year, who was a mid to low 4-star. But I think, he has a lot of talent, is going to produce at a high level at Texas. But outside of that, it's been 3 stars and, lower profile players. We haven't seen Bo Davis bring in one of those big guys up front who looks like they can make an impact from day one. That's Dominique McKinley, right, out of Louisiana. And I love how this staff has gone head-to-head with LSU really the last 2 years and almost came on top in every recruiting battle, right? You talk about a Derek Williams, you talk about a Colin Simmons, and now potentially a Dominique McKinley right out of Louisiana. And then, of course, taking Arch Manning, who was never considering LSU to begin with. But this is a big body up front, really strong, really physical, top 40 player in the country, the type of player you need in the trenches up front, anchoring that defensive line in the middle of dominant edges like Colin Simmons to win at the highest level in the SEC. LSU is still a big factor. Oklahoma is still a big factor. Ohio State is in it. But all of the tea leaves seem to be pointing to the University of Texas. And for the next 3 years, you could have Dominique McKinley and Colin Simmons lining up next to each other on the 40 acres. That's a scary sight. And when we go to our 24/7 class calculator, I'm not going to do it live on the show. If you were to add Kobe Black and Dominique McKinley to this class right now, that's currently ranked 17th on 24/7 Sports, that would jump you all the way up to 7th. So just those 2 players who are leaning towards Texas would jump you 10 spots in the recruiting rankings. Then we look at 5-star offensive tackle Brandon Baker out of California. Now, you brought in Spencer Shannon from Mater Dei, last year. That's the school that Bryce Young went to. And so maybe there's a pipeline there that you can continue. And we know right now, Texas is the place to be for offensive linemen. Texas is the place to be for offensive line recruiting, right? If you're serious about that position, if you want to be dominant at that position, we saw, what Kelvin Banks was able to do, especially as a tackle. You got to come see Kyle Flood. And, there was a lot of smoke about Oregon. Dan Lanning has went over there and they brought in a lot of offensive linemen. They took Junior Angelau from us, which I'm still sad about. Very excited to watch him this year. But it looks like, Texas has started to take the lead in that recruitment, and huge shout out to Kyle Flood and what he's done with the offensive linemen, right? Like I said, all the top offensive linemen in the country now have to just consider Texas at the least, right? And it looks like Brandon Baker is doing more than considering it. They talked about how, Austin is an easy flight from California and, he wouldn't mind getting away from home and, all of that. So, Brandon Baker could be the heir apparent to Kelvin Banks at that left tackle position. Maybe even, he could be talented enough to start next year at the right tackle position. I know a lot of people think that, Cam Williams will slide into that spot when Christian Jones leaves, but with the pedigree, of a top 35, 40 player in the country like Brandon Baker, who knows? He could come in right away and start at that right tackle position like Kelvin Banks did at left tackle. So this would be a huge recruiting win. I think he is leaning towards Texas, and why not? Like I said, with what Kyle Flood has put on the table the last few years. And if you were to get Brandon Baker plus Kobe Black and Dominique McKinley, now you're looking at the 4th ranked recruiting class in the country, and you would be on pace for the 3rd straight top 5 recruiting class under Steve Sarkisian at the University of Texas, which is crazy to think about. Ryan Wingo, 5-star wide receiver out of St. Louis. There was a lot of smoke for him after his official visit, which I believe was in June. Before that, he was crystal ball to Georgia. And then Fong changed his prediction to the University of Texas. It seems lately, that Missouri has picked up a lot of buzz and a lot of smoke. And I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up there. And just like we want players to, stay home and, compete with Texas on their chest and put on for their home state, maybe he thinks the same thing, right? I could stay at Missouri and do the same thing. And they also brought in Luther Burden, which was the number 1 wide receiver in 2022. So they've done a really good job in terms of wide receiver recruiting. So Texas is still hot, on the trail for Ryan Wingo. They're doing everything they can to bring him in and have him commit to the 40 acres, but that could be a battle that comes down to Texas and Missouri, and that could be a battle I could see Missouri winning. But obviously, that's a recruitment that's going to go down to December, right? Wherever he commits, and you would love to have a talented playmaker like that in Steve Sarkisian's offense. Wardell Mack, talk about another Louisiana, LSU, and Texas battle that's trending towards Texas this way, right? Corner out of Louisiana would be a good get for Terry Joseph, a top 115 player in the country. And I think it would help mitigate the loss of Corian Gibson, right? Even though Corian Gibson was ranked about 50 spots higher, if you could bring in Kobe Black and Wardell Mack in one recruiting class, that's still a hell of a haul at that position. And like I said, he's leaning towards Texas, even though he's out of Louisiana, even though it's a Texas and Louisiana battle. The best thing ever to happen to Texas might be LSU hiring Brian Kelly, not necessarily on the field because they're going to win, but in terms of recruiting, right? These players are just going to pick Texas over LSU. They're going to pick Steve Sarkisian over Brian Kelly. Colin Simmons just said it directly out of his mouth. And if Wardell Mack does end up coming to the University of Texas with Kobe Black, with Dominic McKinley, and with Brandon Baker, now you're looking at the 3rd ranked recruiting class in the country. And a player that Texas fans have either forgotten about or just kind of gave up on. And this is why I hate the new state of recruiting, because Texas fans don't even care about Micah Hudson no more, right? And he's a top 20 player in the country, 5-star receiver, somebody who's dominant and would be dominant in the system. But because all the tea leaves are pointing to Texas Tech, we're just like, oh, Texas Tech got him. Go have fun. Enjoy the new Big 12, right? It's like Texas could very well still get Micah Hudson. He has not made his decision yet. He has not committed yet. And I know that Texas is going to recruit him through the whistle. He has a great relationship with Chris Jackson, our new wide receiver coach. And, he's somebody that, would make a lot of plays at the University of Texas. And I think he's somebody, wherever he goes to school, is going to end up dominating in the NFL. So, like I said, this is what the new, age of recruiting has done to us. We don't even talk about Micah Hudson anymore because we've all just assumed he's going to Texas Tech. But I promise you, the staff hasn't assumed that. And they're doing everything in their power to get him to the 40 acres. So this is the 17th ranked class right now on 24/7 Sports. I fully believe Steve Sarkisian ends up with his 3rd straight top 5 class at the University of Texas. Special stuff at the 40 acres. A quick word from our sponsors, and then my thoughts on the new Big 12. So obviously, the Big 12 had to rebrand. They brought in Brett Yormark as a commissioner. And I'm not going to sit here and say that losing Texas and Oklahoma aren't a big deal. Those are 2 of the biggest brands in the sport, especially talking about college football. Those are 2 blue bloods. And, those are 2 programs that any conference would love to have, right? And so obviously that is a huge loss for the Big 12 and their brand. And that's a huge gain for the SEC, right? Which was already regarded as the best conference in college football, where it just means more. Well, it means a little bit more now that you've added Texas and Oklahoma. But I really like the new Big 12, right? And forgive me if that's blasphemy, it does go into the SEC. I know a lot of Texas fans are over the Big 12 and they're ready to leave. I am too, but I really like what they're doing with this conference. First, you added Cincinnati, UCF, BYU, and the University of Houston. And maybe, big names, maybe nobody that, makes you jump out of your chair or anything like that. But those were schools that have had success at, smaller conferences. And given that Big 12 boost, we've already seen it in recruiting, maybe they can make some noise, right? You also have teams that have been in the conference that can now, possibly take their place at the top, right? There's a void at the top, right? Because even though, Oklahoma didn't win it last year, they had won it for a while, and Texas hasn't won it since 2009. Those are still the 2 marquee schools in the conference, right? Whether they win it or not, you're coming to the Big 12 to see Texas and Oklahoma play, right? All those other schools, TCU, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, even if they had good seasons, it's like, that's cool, right? But what are Texas and Oklahoma doing, right? You would care more about a 5-7 Texas team than you would about a 10-win Kansas State team. That's just the reality. But now that Texas and Oklahoma are gone, there's a void at the top, right? If Kansas State is winning that conference every year, if Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, BYU, whoever is winning that conference every year, TCU, now they're going to have the spotlight because they're at the top of the Big 12. And I don't think the Big 12 will be the Big 10 with what they've added. They certainly won't be the SEC, but that'll be a fun conference to watch. And then we saw the Pac-12 explode, and now they're the Pac-4 with USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington going to the Big 10. And now the Big 12 capitalized on the demise of the Pac-4 now and added Colorado and Dion, which is just must-see TV in itself, right? And then they added Arizona, Arizona State, and Utah, which has been one of the best programs in college football for the last decade. So I really love what they've done with the new Big 12. Obviously, like I said, losing Texas and Oklahoma are a huge loss, but I still think this will be a really fun conference moving forward. You know, it's hard to predict what will happen in terms of conference realignment. You know, it's hard to predict if the Big 12 will be here in 10 years, right? But I really like what Brett Yormark has done in the face of adversity, right? He came in and had no choice but to lose his two biggest dogs, right, in Texas and Oklahoma. And I think the way he's pivoted after that has been special. And I think this league is going to be really fun to watch. Even though we'll be in the SEC, I will still, tune into Big 12 football. And it'll be interesting to see with Texas and Oklahoma gone, who will become the new big dog in the Big 12, or will there just be a lot of parity? Like I said, and I love the, offseason additions of the four schools, UCF, BYU, U of H, and Cincinnati. And I love the way that Brett Yormark capitalized and brought in Colorado, Arizona State, Utah, and Arizona when it looked like and still looks like the Pac-4 might officially be done. So excited about the new Big 12, excited that we get to compete in the last year in the Big 12 under Brett Yormark with some new teams in it. And like I said, even though we'll be in the SEC and that's where our focus will be, the Big 12 will be a conference that I watch for years to come. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can sleep peacefully tonight because Colin Simmons is a Longhorn. Hook 'em. Peace.